Hi, everybody. We thank you very much for joining a little early. Gold star for you. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Thanks. Hi, everybody. This is Ann, the moderator for today. It's straight up on the hour, but we are going to wait 2 more minutes to allow other folks to join. So appreciate you joining those that have joined early. Thank you so much. And 2 minutes from now, promise. Thanks. Hi, everybody. We'll get started in 1 minute. Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Customers First Now CX Leader Series event. We typically hold these webinars monthly on a variety of customer experience topics and try when possible to have our customers present on topics. In today's session, you will hear from Laureen Sahowski, CX Strategist and Senior Consultant at Customers First Now, discussing some best practices of customer journey mapping interviewing. So, a little bit about Laureen. Laureen is a career CRM marketer and customer experience specialist with over 25 years expertise in leveraging customer data assets and market insights to optimize customer engagement, deliver product and market growth, and maximize the shareholder value. Laureen has held executive roles in some of Canada's leading advertising agencies, where she developed industry-leading programs to acquire and retain customers, build CRM methodologies, and define optimal customer/channel engagement strategies for her clients. She was also a member of the executive team at Canada Post Corporation, where she defined strategic direction and led the implementation of an organization-wide customer-centric transformation for the direct marketing line of business, resulting in successive years of growth for this multi-billion-dollar business unit. Laureen has been a member of the CFN team since 2013 and leads a variety of customer experience strategic engagements for various globally recognized brands. Before we get started, just a few key things. We are recording today's session for future download and replay purposes. You will receive an email from the company with links to access the recording. Anytime during this session, you can submit your questions by going to the Q&A panel on your WebEx control panel, select Ask Host, and enter your question into the box. When you're done entering it, click Send. You can ask as many questions as you like, and we will try to answer as many as time allows. If we don't get to all of them afterwards, Laureen will reach out to you personally and respond to your question. The presentation will be made available after this to anyone who requests it through the same Q&A panel. Just put your name in that panel, and we'll get the electronic file over to you. So again, thank you very much for joining today, and now I will turn it over to Laureen.
Thank you so much, Anne, and welcome to everybody. I'm delighted everybody's joining us today to talk about one of my favorite subjects. And I have to say, when I'm working on journey mapping projects, the customer interview process is a lot of fun and always very, very interesting in terms of what we learn. So for today, what I'm going to take you through, as Anne said, best practices, sort of tips and tricks of the trade of how to get the most out of your customer interviews. And again, this is one of my favorite aspects of the job. Why do we do journey mapping research? And you know, when I talk to a lot of companies, they have really robust research departments. They've done a lot of research on the customer, but what we find is it's always very specific about a certain aspect of their experience or journey. What our journey mapping research or approach is really to get a holistic end-to-end view of the customer experience. And in doing that, you get a sense of where are the highlights and lowlights of their overall journey in there. It is important to have that customer voice being brought into, the outside voice being brought into the internal organization. And again, our structure is kind of that end-to-end experience. In doing that, as I said, you've got the highlights and the lowlights. This allows you to identify holistically across that entire journey what are the most critical engagements or critical touch points, those moments of truth or where those engagements, they matter the most to your customer. As well, going through this type of research, it's very easy to identify across the whole journey where are we causing pain or frustration for our customers. Those are the primary objectives of the research. Done well, though, it also provides a great opportunity to get some insight into what your customers' both rational and emotional needs are across the journey. From a product development standpoint, sometimes this is where we identify where the competition is really beating us out or where there's unmet needs, which obviously are always very helpful for product development, in addition to understanding the customer experience. Next slide, Anne. Why is it so important? You do have blind spots. I find in doing this, it's just fascinating, and I'll tell a story from back about 3-4 years ago. Our process, we start with an internal view. We build the map internally, and as part of that process, we ask the internal teams, what touch points, where on the journey are your critical engagement points with your customers? Where are those moments of truth? Where are the pain points? When we complete the external research with the customers, we actually marry the two up to see what degree of accuracy or how well does the client organization know their customers. And we find there's always blind spots. I find on average, you know, roughly 70 to 80% are accurate or common, but it's that other 20 to 30% where the organization has these blind spots. And what are the implications of that? So my story, about 3-4 years ago, we were working with the client, and they were internally had talked about this as a significant critical engagement for our clients. We know we're causing a lot of pain. We're investing millions of dollars in reconfiguring this to address it. When we went out and actually talked to the customers, we probed around this particular area of their journey, and the customers said, yeah, it's a bit of a pain point, but that's not the key thing. We really need them to focus on this. And the this that they talked about was an area that was not on the radar of the organization at all. So I often say to our clients, spend a bit of money to do the research because it could save you a lot of money making sure that you're prioritizing your activities and working on the things that matter most to your customers. So I often ask clients, do you really know, are you certain you know what the expectations and needs are of your customers? What really, really matters to them most, and where are you not meeting their needs? Where are you letting them down? And I can guarantee most companies, or every company that I've done these projects with, everybody has blind spots to a certain degree, so it is important. And next slide. Before you get started, so there's a bit of an assumption here. When we do the research, we build an internal view of the customer journey map. And as I said, we identify internally where does the organization feel the critical engagement points are. It is important to at least have this map before you start. It provides the foundation. You're not sharing the map with your interviewees, but it gives you that spine, that backbone, which will guide the conversation. What we actually do is pull the customer through this journey, going stage by stage so that we get that holistic view of what's most important to our customers. If at the very least, if you don't have the individual touch points, which are the gray boxes on the bottom of this, the journey stages, having a well-defined journey that your customers go through is important. And again, it guides our interview process through there. And next slide. Let's get ourselves set up for success. And finding the right audience is just key. You're not talking to every single representative customer. You want to be very specific on a persona or a segment that you want to explore. Different personas, different segments, they have very, very different needs and expectations across your journey. So a good example of this, if we think about this, years ago, I had a telecommunication, a mobile phone company as my client. We talked about road warriors. These were the really, really heavy, the phone was always, the smartphone was always in their hand. They were heavy data users, they heavy voice users, and they always had state-of-the-art, the latest, greatest technology. The other end of the spectrum were the safety-first persona group. These people primarily had a phone just in case they had an emergency. Very low data usage, very low phone usage, and typically their technology, their smartphone was a phone. Today, these people would probably still have a flip-top phone. So very, very, the technology wasn't as important. The important thing, if you think of those two segments, building a map for them and to understand what matters most would be very, very different. The rational, emotional needs, expectations would be extremely different. And also, likely the common journey pathway that they would take across all of the touch points might be significantly different. So it's really, really important starting out, define your audience as clearly as possible. If you have a screener, pulling them in, make sure that they've got a very, very tight definition of the audience you're looking for so that they put the selection processes and filters in appropriately. Something else to consider, because this is an end-to-end map, it's very easy for all of us to find existing customers. They've got a lot of long tenure customers that would come in. They're the obvious ones to reach out. But think about that journey. It's great. And I always ask our clients, find me some customers who are brand new, who've just come on board. Very helpful to explore that early stage of the journey of understanding how did they become aware of the company. How the process that they went through as they evaluated the company and made the decision process. And as well, the early stages of their experience, like the first 100 days or the onboarding experience. So I always ask for some recently acquired customers. You'll obviously, long-term tenure customers are fairly easy to get. Look for, and it might be important if it's an area that internally they've identified, if you've got retention issues, if that's a core area that you want to explore. Look at the customer feedback and complaint process and maybe ask for somebody that's recently gone through that to explore that. And one that I always ask for is really, really hard to get is find some customers who've recently left you. And it's important not only to understand why they've left you, but the experience of a customer leaving. Back in my old marketing days, we always had, we had our acquisition programs, we had our loyalty, upsell, cross-sell, we wanted to expand. But there were always these win-back programs. And if you can really understand the process that that customer has gone through and the reasons that they've left, it really helps to support those win-back programs in designing them well. So again, you see I've got new customers from the beginning of the journey, during their experience, and then at the end. It's important to have that spectrum if at all possible. But again, ultimately, one of the best practices, be very specific on who your audience is that you want to talk to. Clearly define it as much as possible. And next slide. So another best practice, and the success of your interview is so dependent on your ability to tear down the walls with the customer. And I love, the lady on the left-hand side of this slide. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in and started an interview off, and this is the exact body language you have from the person that you're interviewing. Very closed, arms crossed. They're very wary. Some of them, I've had people, they're extremely nervous. You know, am I going to fail this? Am I going to be able to answer the question? Am I going to do a good job? Your job as the interviewer is to take that person from the left side of the page and turn them into that right side. And look how open she is. She's smiling. She's very relaxed. And that ultimately is your first goal in the interview, is to get the person from the left side of the page to the right side of the page. So how do we do this? And it is dependent in terms of the amount of information and the richness of the insights that they'll provide you. The open body language will certainly give you a lot more. I have a three-step process that I go through. It's review, reassure, and relax. The first thing I open up with is, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of the interview, and why it is so important to the company that the client that I'm working for. Next, I'll move to reassurance. Reassurance that their opinions, their thoughts, their feelings, everything really, really matters. I ask them, the best thing that they can do for me is to be absolutely open, honest, and frank. I always have the advantage of I'm not part of the client organization, so I can say my feelings aren't going to be hurt. Please be open and honest. And then the last one, which is most important, is to get them to relax. And the strategy here, get them talking as soon as possible. I always start them out with what I say is the hardest question they're going to have to answer, and then I hit them with, tell me a bit about yourself. And it's a quick way of getting them to start talking about, starting to engage with you. Now, I use that first question of tell me a bit about yourself as a validation, because often it's my clients, my customers that are pulling in the interviewees. It's my first opportunity to really validate quickly whether or not the person I'm talking to is within the persona or segment that we want to be talking to. So I not only just say, tell me a bit about yourself. There's some risk if you just leave it at that, because that conversation could go on for 20 minutes. I get them very specific of, tell me a bit about yourself, and I wrap it into the context of who I'm looking for. Where do you live? How long have you been with that company? Or how long have you been engaged or working with or using ABC company as your supplier, or buying products from that company? It allows me to quickly validate that. But bottom line for this, review, reassure, relax, get your interviewee at ease, and your ultimate goal visually is to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of that page. And next slide. Thank you. So let's talk about the actual interviewing strategies. We've got the right audience. We're getting them to relax and open up. But the overall approach to interviewing, I kind of always start with an unaided, a very broad. You hear what they have to say. I move then into more aided. I can start guiding them through the journey, and then I'll dig in deep and probe. And I'll probe based on either something that they have said, the triggers, there might be something I need to explore a little bit further, or it's something that during the internal build, working with the client organization, they've identified as an area of opportunity or a known area of a customer experience. So I'll probe and poke at those a little bit. I'm going to spend a little bit of time digging into each of these and explaining these out a bit further. So next slide. Let me start with the unaided process. So before I get into the actual taking them through the journey stages, and immediately after they tell me a bit about yourself, I move into the next question, which, and to be honest, this still is, you're still working on that relax stage. But I generally open with a, tell me about your experience with ABC company, or what you feel the brand, the ABC company brand stands for. Something very general, something, again, very holistic around the entire experience. And the benefit of that is I start hearing very early on what their overall experience has been like. It's an early indicator of potentially some hot spots or some unique aspects of this particular individual's journey, and what they feel is most important. I'll often use this not only as a means of getting that interviewee to relax a little bit more, but to set up some parameters or some guidelines around where I need to take the journey for the customer. Anne? Anne?
Yes, Lorraine?
I've lost my visual. Am I still, everyone still hear me?
Yes?
Okay. Just bear with me 1 second here. I'll pull up the presentation and I'll do this. Apologies, everybody.
No worries.
Technology. You want to get that early indication of what's most important for the customer. You listen. You really start listening to some of those early emotions that the customer might have in their journey. What are some of their needs? Where are the critical engagements across the journey in there? And again, two approaches to doing this. One I use most often and most interviewees will use is the open-ended introduction question. As I said, tell me about, you tell me about your relationship with ABC Company. But another option that I sometimes use, and it depends on the specific client that I've got, is homework assignments. So before the interview, when we've booked the interview and before the interviewee comes in, we ask them to prepare something in advance. And a couple of interesting ones is more a photo journal of their experience. So, as an example, if we were exploring the journey of a car, the purchase of a new car, we might ask our interviewees to pull a bunch of pictures that really highlight their experience from the time they walked into the showroom through the whole buying process, the financing process, and then they're ultimately taking delivery of the vehicle. And it really gets at the emotions and gives you some clues, and then you have them present that to you at the beginning of the interview. Another one is that I've used, and this was a fun one. It was with a wedding service. We have the interviewees write a love letter about the company that was providing this wedding service. So when we guided them, we said, we write a love letter to us about how you first met ABC Company. What were your first impressions? How those impressions deepened or changed as you really got to know one another? And how did the love affair end? It made it fun for them. Again, it put them into a great mindset of thinking about their journey. And for myself as the interviewer, was a great kickstart in getting the people relaxed and really, really engaged in the conversation, as well as giving me some deep insights around that. So again, you want to listen for the emotions that they're talking about, the specific needs, critical engagements, and some early indications from pain points. So Anne, next slide. So the next step, that was step one. Next step, I start, and this is where your journey map or your journey stages come in. And again, I often have clients say, well, do you show them the map? No, I never show them the actual map. It could be a bit mind-blowing because there's so many touch points. I might show them the journey stages and talk about each of the stages they go through. But for the interviewing purpose, what's really important is understanding the stages that they go through from beginning to end, so from aware to interest to making that decision. When we get into this aided experience discussion, what I'm doing is actually pulling them through each of those stages. So I'll start at the left-hand side of the journey and start talking about the aware stage, in this case, on this map, and really digging in deep to understand what was their experience during this. So again, I kind of sort of follow that same process of an unaided question of, tell me about how you first became aware of ABC Company. And then I get into a much more aided discussion around information that I have insights on or information that they've provided in this. So if I go to the next, and again, during this, you're looking for moments of truth, pain points, and this concept of commonality. What is every interviewee that you bring in talking about in there? So that common base. So Anne, next slide. As part of that, so I get into somewhat more guided conversation, and then I go down deep and really deeply probe some of these key engagement points to further explore them. Now, the driver of this will be one of two things. Either the interviewee themselves has sent some type of signal to me that this is a common or a touch point that they're using, or it's an experience that they've had, and I want to learn more about it. So, they may say, I went through the website, and it could be very neutral. And I may ask, well, tell me about that. Internally, my internal process, the internal teams may have said, you know what, our website is awful. And we hear this a lot. It's very difficult for our customers to use. Well, I want to see, do our customers feel that as well? So during that aware stage, I may ask them, did you use the website? Just it's a very neutral question. I'm not leading the witness in any way. And if they say yes, I say, just tell me about your experience. What was done well? What could what could they do better? And that's often a common question I'm asking through the interview. What did they do well? What could they do better in that? So it's a deeper probe. And again, that commonality is important. I'm looking for, through this process, either them unprompted bringing up issues or through probing bringing up issues. But I'm looking for is our majority of the interviewees citing this as a critical engagement point, a moment of truth, or a pain point through that journey. And then next slide, Anne, the third step. So I've taken the customer or the interviewee through all of the stages of the journey at this point. I want to wrap up with an overall question, some overall experience first. So you go back up high level again, you raise up above it. The purpose of this is really to help you get some priority around of everything that they've talked about in that end-to-end journey. They've likely identified 4 or 5 critical engagement points or moments of truth, and they may have identified 10 or 12 pain points of varying degrees in there. When you get to this wrap up, you ask them to sort of summarize, sort of on final reflection, if we think about everything we've talked about today, what are the 2 or 3 things that is absolutely most important for ABC Company to get right? You're looking for those things that the customer feels are essential to their overall experience. They put a very, very high level or priority on these things, and those would be your top moments of truth for the customer. As well, because you've got a lot of pain points that are likely issues that the customers have that's come up when you look at the end-to-end journey, is ask them what are the 2, 3, 4 that are most painful for them, and that they would really like to see the organization, if they were in charge, get the organization to address. So again, it's about prioritizing these across the journey. I'm going to pause there and go to the next slide here. I talked a lot about moments of truth or critical engagement points and pain points. Our clients often ask you, how do you define a moment of truth? How do we find those moments of truth in pain points? So I thought it would be helpful if we just paused for a minute and looked more closely at what are these. First of all, by definition, so that map, actually, first of all, the map that you have in there with all the red, yellow, and green stoplight colors on there, I'd said before it's really important to have the touch points kind of mapped out in your mind or on paper, because as you identify the pain points, as you identify critical engagement points, it gives you a place to mark them on the map, to highlight them, to show where they're happening on the map. Now, on this map, the green boxes, we call these the moments of truth. These are really the key interaction points, customer interaction points that can make or break the customer experience. You need to understand where these exist, and I always say to the clients, if you're doing these well, you want to make sure you're not turning that tap off. You've got to keep the focus on it. From doing well, these are the drivers often where we see experiences that the customers talk about, where they're communicating to others or advocating. They could be the experiences that cause, as a result, them to come back and buy more, to stay with you longer. And if they're not done well, this is where we see people decreasing the amount that they're spending with you, talking poorly about the organization, or potentially leaving as a key driver of churn in there. So important to kind of look at. I'll give you an example in a minute. The yellow boxes on there, those are our customer pain points. It's areas where we're causing undue frustration or dissatisfaction, and they're actually fairly easy to identify during the interview process, because the customers will be very specific in identifying these as pain points. But often the pain points are being, you're creating undue effort or exceptional amount of effort for the customers to engage. the experience just isn't bad. You often see pain points occurring around the website because they can't find the information that they're looking for on the website, or the usability of the website hasn't been a great user experience. Again, there's a disproportionate amount of effort required on their part to accomplish some task in there. And it could just be a gap between their expectations and the reality that they provide. The thing to watch on here when you're going through the interview are gaps between what's your brand promise, the expectations that could be being set by Salesforce, and what you're actually delivering once they come in-house as a customer in there. The most important on this map are what we call the overlays, or it's an intersection of this is a moment of truth where we're not serving the customer well, and these are the most critical to the customer, to your customer retention. These are often, if you look closely at them, are key drivers of your customer churn in there, and they should be your immediate focus or your organization's immediate focus to address. I'll give you a couple of examples in there. Let's think about public transit. I think most of us probably at some point have taken the transit. A pain point might be in the interviewing. You would hear people talk about, when they get on the bus isn't very clean. There's coffee cups or pop cans, newspapers. That to me is a pain point. It's not a reason that individual is going to stop riding the bus, but it's an annoyance for them. So I tack that one up to being just a pain point. Now, again, staying in the public transit space, when I'm standing at a bus stop waiting for my bus, I have a set expectation that bus is going to arrive according to the schedule when they tell me it's going to arrive. That's my moment of truth. That moment of truth turns into a pain point when the bus doesn't arrive on time. And I built my schedule around the schedule of the transit organization. And if they're not there on time, I'm going to be late for something as well. So, but in that case, that kind of we always say, "Where's my bus?" coming in becomes a moment of truth and pain point. Customers want the reliability, and when it's not delivered, it becomes a pain point. Another example, if you think through the drive-through at a fast food chain, whether it's McDonald's, Burger King, any of those, you have an expectation when you place your order, you pay for your food, and they pass it through your car window, that your order is correct. And there's a high expectation. That would, again, be that moment of truth. That moment of truth turns red when you get home and open up the bag and you discover that your food order isn't what you had actually ordered. So a couple of examples, and I hope that helps to clarify that. It's a bit intuitive, but again, as you listen to your customers, you'll get a sense of where they're most passionate in the interviewing process around their experience. And those are often look more deeply because they're probably the moments of truth. And I'm going to move to the next slide. So I'm going to wrap this up with sort of three final thoughts here for you. The first is in sort of best practices or things to consider overall in the interviewing process. The first one is be objective. Be very aware of internal biases. As working with our clients, I have to be careful because I've got deep insights on what they've told me are the customer issues and how they go about doing business. I have to stay neutral. It's even harder if you are the member of the client organization doing the interview with the interviewee. You have to be aware of not only how you react and respond to things that customers are saying, but also how your body language is reacting and responding. I've had clients attend interviews with me where partway through the interview they try to rationalize an experience that the customers had, and very quickly that interviewee will shut down on me and not offer up any more honest opinions. What I recommend is if there's something that you think is really needs to be corrected in terms of perception or an experience that a customer has had, and it's your company, is leave it to the end of the interview and then come back to those areas that they've talked about and try to help them out with those. And the next one is on here, listen hard. It's kind of a catchphrase that I've got. It's going to let the going to tell you what matters most. But when I say listen hard, you've got to listen to the words that they're using, kind of the verbal cues that they're using. And again, it goes back to words like frustrated versus angry. Very different in the level of experience. But in terms of listening hard, it's not just listening with your ears. You have to listen with your eyes as well. The candidate in front of you, their body language is going to tell you so much. And I can't tell you how often I've asked a question and I'm getting actually a very neutral response back from the interviewee, but their language is telling me that there's a big issue there. And that's another flag for me to probe a bit more deeply and really understand what's going on there. So listen hard. Let the customers tell you, and listen with both your eyes and your ears. And then the third thing overall to convey to you, be flexible. It's very easy to write an interview script. It's very difficult to follow that script because it's a conversation, it's a discussion, and your customers will take you on a bit of a journey as well. So remember, create some guidelines on that, but you're going to get into the discussion and you've got to follow a very natural flow. Now, my strategy for this has always been, when I'm developing out my discussion guide, I actually think each journey stage, what do I need to find out? Beyond the, what has the company done well, where can they do better? But are there specific areas I want to probe? And I kind of highlight those on my discussion guide, so it's a quick eye glance down. I can see an area and then find a way to weave it into the conversation. And I think, overall, it doesn't have a bullet point, but one thing I would like to remind you, customers, it's the greatest opportunity to get the insight coming from your customers. And I would recommend, have fun, be relaxed, and really, really enjoy the journey that they're going to take you on. Thank you. Anne, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Laureen. It was great presentation. And we have the questions coming in. So the first question was, can the slide deck be shared? And yes, Sam, the slide deck will be shared. We'll get it over to you. Thank you very much. The next question, hold on. How many interviews do you need, or do you suggest you need to do in order to get the required level of insights?
Yeah, this is actually an excellent question, and I think people are quite often surprised by how few. We're not talking about hundreds of interviews. Depending on the situation and depending on how many different personas you have, I often find that after about 6 interviews, I have a pretty good idea of where the common points. I wouldn't recommend just doing 6 interviews, though. If you have let's say one persona, you're very focused on one specific audience, and in the consumer, the B2C space, 10 to 12 interviews should be sufficient for getting the insights that you need and really identifying, because again, I go back to that concept of commonality of questions. There are 10 to 12 interviews. You should be able to identify where groups, 50% or 75% of the interviewees are all talking about this as a particular touch point. The difference when I'm in a B2B environment, the dynamics change a little bit, because you may be going into a company level and you want to know what that company experienced, but you've got to talk to 2 or 3 different people within that company to get the whole end-to-end. So when we're with, and again, assuming it's one region, one geography, and you want to know, usually a minimum of about 6 companies is more than sufficient, and you may have to be interviewing 2 or 3 different people within each of those companies. The more interviews, though, and more is not a bad thing. You never want to have too few. The more interviews, the deeper the insights. And if you're doing this for the first time, I would always err on the side of having too many interviews rather than too few interviews. So, and the more, the caveat to that is, if you've got 3 different personas that you want to really understand the dynamics, that's, it's got to multiply those number of interviews. If you're doing different regions, that also becomes a bit of a multiplier effect, because there could be regional impacts, particularly in the B2B, actually in the consumer world too. That people interact with the company a bit differently. But generally, you just want to have enough that you can get that insight.
Thank you, Lorraine. The next question. Can these interviews be done by phone, or are they always going to be face-to-face?
My preference is always to do this wherever possible, face-to-face. And it really, on the screen there, they listen hard. It gives you that opportunity to read the body language. And the body language, I can't tell you how much that tells you. But having said that, there are times, budget sometimes will drive, the client can't afford to have the interviewing team or interviewer traveling all over the country. So, the phone becomes kind of the second choice. My preference is always face-to-face. In the B2B space, again, always prefer to do the face-to-face, but I find more often we're doing phone interviews, just particularly if you've got to talk to executives, and you've got to do it quickly. It's just easier to do them over the phone. But I think just recognize, I would say, you're doing them by phone. You have to listen even harder. You have to listen for change in tonality of their voice to sort of pick up what's probably body language cues in there. But you can do them by both, by either phone or face-to-face. Face-to-face, I think, as I've highlighted, there's some benefits to it.
Thank you. Next question. Do you recommend individual interviews or focus groups?
That's another actually very interesting question. My personal preference, and the preference of a lot of the CFN team, is really to do the in-depth interviews. You've got 60, 90 minutes with one individual that you can really explore their journey from end to end. And it allows you to go much deeper in an individual discussion than what you can get in a focus group or a group setting. Focus groups, though, and I've used focus groups within the automotive sector, some of the home do-it-yourselfer repair sector. They're good in that your consumers are, you go back to that starting principle of getting your interviewee relaxed. I find that focus groups are really great at getting the consumers relaxed. Safety in numbers, I guess, there in the group dynamic. The group can provide you with a really rich 360-degree perspective. So one person may bring up an issue, and very quickly either the rest of the group will say, no, that's not an issue for me, or they'll all glob on to, yeah, that's an issue for all of us. So it's a really rapid way of distilling out through the priorities. But, when you've got 8 to 10 people sitting around a table, your ability to go deep and really deeply explore things is a bit more limited. So again, it's personal preference. Mine is always the one-on-one in-depth interviews. One thing to recommend, though, and the other thing with focus groups, the benefit of focus groups, clients really, really like it because they've got the one-way glass and they can bring in a cross-section, a cross-functional team of people to sit on the other side of the glass to observe. And there's a lot of power in that in creating empathy back within the organization to hear it firsthand from the customers what's going on. So there is that value. Where, and my recommendation to people, because I really always worry about losing the depth that you get, use a combination. Start with the focus groups, kind of get that high level, and then throw in maybe 4 in-depth interviews or one-on-one interviews with some candidates. You can explore some things more deeply. That was a good question.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question. How would you, or do you look at, how do you integrate customer survey data with your interviews?
That is also a good question. A couple of things to do, and it just depends on the resources that you've got. For us here, we've got a wonderful analytics team, and we'll hand them the customer survey data, feedback data. even before we get into the interview, they can, we can have the voice of what the internal resources say. And it's an early indicator of what your customers are saying. And it highlights and can actually help our interviewing process to hear what are customers talking about. And then again, to probe that more deeply to get a deeper knowledge of it. We use, everybody's got customer satisfaction surveys and they're great, but I often hear from clients, yeah, they're telling me that that's an issue, but I don't know why. Like, years ago, I had this as an issue with one of the products that I was managing, where the customers said, you're not easy to deal with. And I always struggled with that because, and I had a very low rating on ease of doing business, I guess, with the category. Because a small business, easy working with the post office in your small business is extremely different than ease of doing business when you're large. And that's where the internal interviews really come in to help to dimensionalize that. But for us, our analytics team will actually take the survey responses and go in and highlight on the map what the customers are saying or pain points and critical engagement points, even before we get in to the interviews. So it helps us to validate that. The other thing, if you don't have the analytics option, look at it closely because it's an early indication of where of areas to probe in that journey of where experiences might be happening. It helps you to validate, but also dimensionalize it.
Oh, hi, this is Carrie Nelson. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to add something to this on the survey data because it's a great question, and I actually was with a customer yesterday as we're looking at their journey map. And one of the things that survey data will also help with your interviews is, because as Laureen said, once you get to about 10 to 12 interviews, you're hearing the same thing. You can really get some really great qualitative data. The thing a survey will do is also help you sell internally the key themes, because there's more data, it's more statistically significant. I mean, you're talking typically hundreds, thousands of pieces of feedback versus 12 interviews. So while the interview process, the value is exponential because you're getting the voice of the customer and you're able to tell stories, the survey data layered onto your customer interview feedback is really important to get some credibility and just link the different things others in the organization are hearing. So the two go really hand in hand. And I just had to interject because this came up in a discussion yesterday I had with a client. So, but this is a great discussion.
Thank you, Carrie. Laureen, here's the next question. With face-to-face interviews, do you record them?
Yes, I do. For a variety of reasons. And I'm just going to step back up to getting your interviewee to relax. I have to tell you, as soon as they see that tape recorder, you'll just see their body language lock. Sometimes I'll set it kind of out of their line of sight in there, but I to be honest, I didn't find that they kind of they stopped paying attention to it. The importance of twofold of capturing, recording the interviews. First, I always go back. It's to hear the words in the customer's voice. If there's something in my notes and you're trying to capture notes while you're interviewing and paying attention and thinking about your next question, the recording gives you a resource to, again, hear it back in the customer's words and to validate and to listen again to what they were saying. So for an interview, and making your notes is a valuable tool to have. But the second way I've used that with the clients, I often hear client organizations are saying, we have an empathy issue. The organization, we're big, we're not close enough to the customer. And one of the asks that they often have to me is, help us build some empathy. And the best way to do that is to actually play some of these recordings. Not the whole 90-minute interview, but snippets of it. So when you've identified a moment of truth or a critical engagement point that needs to be addressed, to hear the customer talk about it in their own language is extremely powerful. So it's really, really valuable. I always try to record these if possible, so that I've got that both as a backup and as a tool to engage the organization. But that's a great question.
Lorene, I just want to confirm. So before you record a customer, you have to ask them for permission, correct?
Yes, sorry, absolutely. And that's, again, part of that relax. So I will set it up that, you know, I'm recording for note-taking purposes. And you do have to ask their permission before you turn it on. I've never actually had somebody say no. And I think they're wary of it, but when they realize it's just so that you can go back and pull the notes out of it, you'll see them relax, and then they kind of turn their head away from it and carry on. Watch for the eyes going to it and just remind them tell them to ignore it. I have moved it off the table, though. I've had an interviewee that was very distracted by the recorder, so I pulled a chair beside me and put it down so it was out of their line of sight. And it was still effective enough of capturing their thoughts. But yes, you do need to ask the permission.
Thank you. The next question, and we're wrapping up here shortly, but what are the risks of doing the research internally versus using a third party such as Customers First Now?
The benefit of using an outside or third party resource is objectivity. And again, that's kind of why I had highlighted this, beware of your internal biases in there. Customers also tend to be, I find, much more open. And I'm saying this from a perspective of I've done customer interviews with the client present, sitting at the table, even participating in the discussion. And I've done it with the customer not in the room there. And what I always find are customers are much, much more open with a third party than a company. And I think it's just an underlying fear of they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, they don't want to get anybody in trouble. It's easier to talk about the bad about somebody when you're not looking them face to face. So it's you get more out of it, and we're less likely to bring those biases into and remain much more neutral into the interviews. You know, we're much more emotionally removed from the organization, so we tend to listen a little bit differently. The other advantage as well is a skill set. When you do this for a living, you move very quickly through. You know the things to look for. You're prepared to see and watch for the nuances in body language. We tend to have an arsenal of questions that may not even ever be written down. They're kind of in our head. That prompts us to draw better insights for ultimately our customers, our clients out there. So, but you know, it's up to each individual. It is a tough skill though to master. As I think I said earlier, but you know, the skill really is thinking about what you need to get out of the customer, asking the question of the customer, listening to the customer while all at the same time trying to figure out what can be your next redirect on the question. So it's, again, I think the top there is the objectivity and the skill of the third party. But that's not to say it can't be done in-house. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Laureen. So that's it. I haven't gotten any more questions. So to answer a couple of the other side questions that I received, we are recording this, and we will process the recording and the video and the recording today, and you will get an email from the company with the link. But as I said, as a follow-up to this session, we invite you to a complimentary discussion with Laureen. If you heard some information in this presentation that you'd like to dig a little deeper, she is available to you. You can just throw your name in, and Laureen will reach out to you. And as always, as a follow-up to this session, we invite you to take our best practice assessment. If you have attended any of our other webinars, you'll know that we send you a link along with the video link, and for anybody who requested, we'll send out the presentation to you. And so with that, thank you everybody for attending today's session. Recordings of previous sessions are at our website, customersfirstnow.com events. You can also find us, we have a YouTube channel called Customers First Now. We will have, our next webinar is on the 14th of September. and we will be discussing how to link your journey map to actions. The webinar, again, will be on the 14th, and you will receive an invite. And then if you have any additional questions or insights, or you do want to reach out to Lorene and you didn't write down her email address fast enough, my name is on all the webinar communications. So you'll, from the reminders to the confirmations, et cetera, you can always reach out to us. We're always available to answer. So with that, this concludes our CX Leader Panel discussion today. Lorene, thank you very, very much. It was great insights.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.